people. That wasn't always the case. I've mentioned in past reviews that growing up, I hated scary video games. One of my core memories is my cousin trying to get me to play Resident Evil 2 and failing spectacularly. He couldn't even get me past the opening because the zombies terrified me and I didn't understand how tank controls worked. And I still don't know, to be honest. But years later, I had weeks of nightmares after watching a 10-minute preview of Dead Space late night on my great-grandmother's on-demand cable. I wasn't built for this genre at all. All that to say, for years I tried to work up the courage to play horror games and I've always bailed out on them. Then during my freshman years of college in 2017, I stumbled onto Resident Evil 7 Biohazard the day that it launched, which permanently altered my brain chemistry. I've been chasing the high of wandering through the Baker house ever since. Only a handful of games has ever come close to scratching that itch, but Resident Evil 7 was the spark. Plus, Resident Evil 7 didn't just convert me, it saved the series. The Resident Evil franchise has always been laggish after the mixed reception to Resident Evil 6, which leaned hard into the Michael Bay action style and drifted away from its survival horror roots. But Resident Evil 7 marked the beginning of what I think of as the Resident Evil engine era, a creative resurgence powered by a new engine and a renewed commitment to dread. This era gave us Resident Evil Village and the stellar remakes of Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, which brings us to the 9th mainline entry, and what I see is the combination of everything the Resident Evil engine era has been building towards. Resident Evil Requiem. With the protagonist Leon S. Kennedy and newcomer Grace Ashcroft, the daughter of Alicia Ashcroft from Resident Evil Outbreak, Requiem wears the intention on its sleeve. As the title suggests, is a token of remembrance, a playable clergy of everything that came before. Specifically, it frames itself around the Raccoon City incident from 1998, Resident Evil 2, the singular catastrophe that detonated the series' lore, set in the next 28 years into motion, and forged Leon into this wisecracking, trauma-scarred super agent we know today. Across the roughly 13 hours I spent with the main campaign, Requiem swings hard at reinvention. It tries to thread the needle between pure survival horror during Grace's sections and the slick action horror that defines Leon's. Sometimes it finds the balance, however, it doesn't always stick the landing, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a great time with it. With that all being said, man, does this game really lean on nostalgia? Meet the new protagonist, Grace Ashcroft. The setup is straightforward. Grace Ashcroft, an FBI intelligence analyst, is investigating a string of deaths at the Brentwood Hotel, the same place her mother Alyssa died years ago when she was kidnapped and imprisoned inside the Rose Hill Chronic Care Center. Meanwhile, Leon S. Kennedy is tracking the suspicious death of Raccoon City survivors, following leads tied to a former Umbrella scientist named Victor Gideon, which also brings him to Care Center. For most of the campaign, the two remain separated and their gameplay styles reflect it. Grace plays in first person, similar to Resident Evil 7 and Village, while Leon sticks to the third person modern style popularized by the remakes. Leon's early center care sections are brief before the back half shifts, focus back to Raccoon City. Grace gameplay leans heavily into survival horror. Ammo is scarce, weapons are limited, and avoidance is often smarter than confrontation. She's inexperienced and visibly shaken, still carrying grief and trauma, which contrasts with Leon's heart and confidence and mirrors the rookie cop he once was in Resident Evil 2. As a new protagonist, Grace is serviceable, motivated by guilt and driven to protect Emily, a blind girl she meets in the care center, even if some of her decisions feel more plot-driven than organic. Leon plays almost exactly like he does in Resident Evil 4 Remake, with the bigger additions of a hand axe that emphasizes melee combat. Unlike Grace's breakable knives, Leon's axe is permanent but dull with use and must be sharpened. It's satisfying, weighty, and absolutely is going to inspire axe-only challenge runs. Character-wise, Leon is still tough and traumatized, slightly cornering veteran that we know far removed from the native rookie in Resident Evil 2, but carries decades of survivor guilt along with his one-liners. As I said earlier, Requiem is a peak nostalgia stop in a way that feels intentional and a little exhausting sometimes. From the overall layout of the care center to the structure of its objectives, the return to familiar enemy types, and the another trip back to Raccoon City, the game is overflowing with callbacks to the earlier entries, but it's especially obsessed with Resident Evil 2. While exploring the care center as Grace, I consistently felt the sense of deja vu from Resident Evil 2 Remake because the building is laid out in a way that's almost almost beat for beat reminiscent of Raccoon City Police Station Department. You have two main wings, east and west, for each stretching across the 3 floors, all connecting to a very large central lobby that acts as a temporary sanctuary from the monsters roaming the halls. There were multiple points where I generally stopped and thought this has to be lifted from the RPD because the similarities go beyond the homage and start veering into repetition. It made me miss the uniqueness of the Baker house in Resident Evil 7, which as its core was just a house. Yes, it had a freaky ass basement and fair share of locked doors and puzzles, but it was intimate and contained in a way that made it feel distinct. Compared to the sprawling Spencer Mansion from Resident Evil or the museum turned police station grandeur of Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil felt tight and more focused. In hindsight, Resident Evil 7 felt tight and more focused, and in hindsight, the restraint worked in favor. Requiem, by comparison, felt bigger but not necessarily fresher. Of the two primary antagonists, one serves mostly as a reoccurring boss encounter rather than a fully realized character, and the other comes off as a bargain bin limitation of a franchise antagonist, lacking the charisma and the presence that made him iconic. They're serviceable threats, but they lack the kind of personality that lingers once the credits roll. There's even what I'm fairly certain is a nod to Silent Hill 2 embedded in the level design, something I can't spoil that reinforces the broader impression that the developers are deliberately challenging the late 90s survival horror nostalgia rather than pushing the series in a new directions. Leon sections in the back half of the game are where this becomes the most noticeable, as the nostalgia factors get dialed up almost to a distinct degree, and the moments that are clearly meant to spark recognition instead risk feeling like the game is relying too heavily on past success rather than confidently standing on its own. If you play Resident Evil Village or the recent remakes, you know the drill already. The twist here comes in great sections where killing enemies is almost the worst move you can make. Like in the 2002 remake of Resident Evil, zombies don't always stay dead. In Requiem, some resurrect as blister heads, strong variants that repopulate areas that you've already cleared. Every corpse becomes a potential problem later, which is brutal for Grace and mostly manageable for Leon. Ammo is scarce, so combat as Grace is usually almost about stunning foes and running rather than finishing the job. Combat quickly becomes a calculation of risk versus reward, and more often than not, the smart move is just avoidance. To deal with blister heads, you have a few strategic options. One approach is just to simply let the problem become Leon's problem later, since the two characters share the care center at different points of the campaign. You can theoretically clear zombies as Grace and deal with the evolved forms when you're controlling the better equipped Leon. To permanently stop them, Grace can use her blood collector to gather infected blood and craft injectors, which causes zombies to explode in a massive permanent bloodbath. Resources are limited though, so you have to carefully choose which enemies are worth eliminating for, echoing the corpse burning strategy from the 2002 game. It's a smart system that reinforces her vulnerability and raises tension. Less successful is Grace's stalker enemy, the girl who forces you into hiding focus sequences that often feel more like padding than purposeful horror. The sense of bloat becomes my biggest issue with Requiem. My first run clocked in 9 hours, but it felt more like 13 because some of the objectives just felt stretched. The more frustrating examples come from the near end of Grace's time in the care center, which the primary objective is to find 3 quartz stone to unlock a courtyard door. Each stone is hidden in the office of one of the facility's former directors, locked behind identical puzzle boxes. The puzzle itself is straightforward. Solving it is mostly about finding the clues hidden in each room to know the collect order of the buttons to press. The issue arises with the final puzzle box, where the button icons have been removed and replaced with Braille. Now, Grace is repeatedly framed in promos as a book-smart FBI intelligence analyst, and given that the mechanism is visibly shown which symbol corresponds to each button to press, it's not hard to imagine that she could logically deduce the solution. Unfortunately for you, Grace and the writers think using Emily, the blind child who's been locked in a cage for most of the story, is the best solution for the puzzle. This requires you to carry her through the monster-infested East Wing so she can read the Braille and input the code while defending herself from the zombies. While you're carrying Emily, you cannot defend yourself, and if you want to clear out the enemies beforehand, you have to awkwardly shuffle her back into the security office, set her down, eliminate the threats, and then return to continue the escort. It's contrived and really insults my intelligence more than anything. Visually, Requiem is stunning and just viscerally grotesque as anything the series has delivered before. The gore borders on vomit-inducing in the best way possible, with zombies tearing apart in each horrifying detail as you unload into them. The injector is the standout here. When used, enemies don't just die, they erupt into a massive explosion of blood that coats every near surface in the room. What's most impressive is that it lingers. The rooms where you just cleared an enemies with injectors remain drenched in thick blood for the rest of the time there, turning previous neutral spaces into this grisly reminders of what happened. It's disgusting, it's excessive, and it's technically impressive altogether. From the audio standpoint, the game is equally strong. The gunplay sounds punchy and weighty, with each shot delivering a satisfying impact. Outside the occasional safe room theme, the game is just largely music free, which leaves the ambient sound design to do most of the heavy lifting. Hallways creak, pipes groan, and the distant echoes bounce through the care center walls. The most unsettling touch, though, is that the zombies retain fragments of their former selves. Instead of the usual collection of just grunting snarls and raspy moans, they actually speak. Often they're just broken phrases, lingering thoughts caught into a loop from the moment they turned. One zombie repeatedly muttering about the dim lights because it's his job to make sure that the building isn't too bright. Performance-wise, I played on PS5 and I had a very few issues, aside from a couple of minor graphical glitches that were fixed by reloading the game and ran smoothly throughout my playthrough. It continues to be impressive in how consistently polished Capcom RE engine titles are at launch, especially at the time when performance problems had become almost expected for major releases on PS5. Resident Evil Requiem is a very good game that occasionally gets in its own way. It delivers tense survival horror with grace, satisfying action with Leon, some of the most disgusting gore the series has ever produced, and a rock-solid performance on PS5. Mechanically, it builds its identity on the foundations led by Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, Resident Evil Village, and the modern remakes in many ways. It feels the cleanest refinement of that formula yet. I'd even go as far as to say that it's stronger overall than Village, even if it never quite has the same heights as 7 did as the franchise. Because while Resident Evil 7 wasn't revolutionary in the grand scheme of horror games, it was transformative for Resident Evil. It felt bold, it felt risky, it drags the series back into the dark and forced it to recalibrate. Requiem, by contrast, feels just a lot safer. It's bigger, slicker, and more polished, but rarely daring. Ultimately, Requiem is mechanically satisfying, visually incredible, and generally tense in stretches, and packed with enough fan service to make longtime players grin, even if they occasionally roll their eyes. It might not reinvent the wheel like Resident Evil 7 did for the franchise, but it proves that the Resident Evil engine era still has plenty of gas left in the tank. The nostalgia is the biggest culprit. The care center's one-to-one echoes of the police center from Resident Evil 2, the consistent visual and structure callbacks to Resident Evil 2, the return to Raccoon City, and the late game fan service in Leon sections all make it clear that the entry is deep in love with 1989. Sometimes it works, and sometimes I feel like the game relies on muscle memory rather than new ideas. Even the title Requiem feels like it's deliberately engineered to tug at that same thread. A Requiem is a mass for dead, and the game treats the Raccoon City incident like a sacred text. It isn't just revisiting Resident Evil 2, it's staggering a funeral for it, consistently reminding you of what their loss was and how it shaped everyone involved, especially Leon. Without spoiling anything, the ending strongly suggests that the series may be finally ready to move beyond Raccoon City and Umbrella as the narrative crutch has established a new overarching threat. The name phrases the entire experience as an act of remembrance, which sounds meaningful on paper, but in practice, it often translates into repetition instead of laying it into the past. Requiem spends most of the runtime dragging it back up. With that being said, everyone, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you want to catch me live on Twitch, the link is in the bio, same username. I would love to have you part of the community. If you like this video, like and subscribe. I love when YouTube gives me money for just talking. But until next time, stay safe, stay smart, and stay alpha.